Dean Spade is relatively new to our community. Dean is Assistant Professor of Law at Seattle University. In 2002, Dean founded the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, SRLP, a nonprofit law collective that provides free legal services to transgender, intersex, and gender nonconforming people who are low-income and/or people of color. He also has taught courses at the UCLA Law School and Harvard Law School in the areas of sexual orientation and gender identity. Dean Spade.
I want to especially thank Natalie and Danina for their work on this forum. This is obviously an incredible place. I'm so happy to be in Seattle, in a city where people turn out like this for this event, where this conversation is happening, where groups like Real Change exist. It's a really special moment. A lot of people have thrown out a lot of statistics. I will only add to that just, you know, that this stuff is so overwhelming about imprisonment in the U.S., obviously. I'm sure many of you know that imprisonment has quadrupled in the U.S. since 1980, right? So this form of mass imprisonment we see, we have to know of that as a new thing. This is a new set of strategies. Social control is one term that was used already. And that's been happening despite, of course, property crime and violent crime going down. And that also that the U.S. has the highest documented rate of imprisonment per capita of any country, right? And that we imprison 1 in 100 people in the U.S., right? Which is a new number that came out in 2008. Right now, we imprison 25% of the world's prisoners, even though we have only 5% of the world's population, right? So it's really just, it's shocking. There's a million ways to say it, but we're all saying the same thing. It's really bad. Obviously, other people have already given you the statistics about how significant the racial, gender, ability, national origin disparities are in this, right? But it's not everybody who gets imprisoned equally, right? It's been a fundamentally racialized, gendered system forever, and we've seen the impacts of the ways that disability and national origin play into this as well. For decades and decades, at least for 3 of them, politicians have been telling us that they want a small state. And they tell us that they need a small state, they're going to cut welfare, right, education, we're going to figure out how to privatize stuff, benefits programs, they've got to go. Meanwhile, they're building a huge state detention apparatus, right, a massive state, right, one that expands prisons and immigration detention centers at a rapid rate. I'm sure many of you know that the detention center in Tacoma, where an enormous set of human rights violations happen every day, is also growing while we're considering a new jail here in Seattle. These are the same battles. They're masked as separate legal issues. They're the same legal issue. They're the same issue for all of us. They're about lockdown, right? They're about a global lockdown. They're about a national lockdown that's focused on people of color, poor people, gender outsiders, women, people with disabilities, et cetera, right? And that what we have going with this sort of, we want a small state, but we're going to build this giant detention apparatus, is this combination of things happening. Abandonment, we're going to abandon communities, we're going to take out all the services, we're going to leave people to die, we're going to not fix the levees, we're going to abandon people structurally in every way, right? And then we're also going to sometimes swoop in and contain them, right? The same communities we abandon, we're going to grab huge numbers of those very people because we want to build a new prison here or a new jail there, right? And create those new projects. And so we've seen our resources, right, shift. It's not really been a reduced state, it's been just a shift, right? So I do my work, a lot of work on these issues, specifically coming from a certain perspective. I work with a national coalition called Transforming Justice that has a Seattle chapter. And we're a set of people, primarily formerly imprisoned trans people and allies who are activists, organizers, and lawyers. And we're looking specifically at the immense violence faced by transgender people in prisons and jails. Right, and so some of you know about this. It's one of the many communities that has really high levels of imprisonment because we're so excluded from jobs. We have a lack of family support. We tend to be really low income, and there's an enormous amount of police violence and profiling and harassment of transgender people. Right, there's a stereotype about transgender people all being crazy, which is one thing that will get you locked up, and criminals and frauds. Right, and then when trans people get put into the system, not surprisingly, I'm sure you all know, it's a sex segregated system, and we don't fit. And the result of that is that trans women are put in men's prisons and men's jails all over this country and in juvenile justice facilities. It's the same story, foster care everywhere, right? And the amount of rape and sexual violence faced by trans people is enormous. And of course, no one keeps track of it, so right, I can't give you any statistics about that because according to prisons and jails, we just don't exist. So a lot of our work is focused on that. And in this work, we share this analysis that imprisonment is a gendered form of social control, right? And we have to think about the gendered lens, right? And that there's a number of elements to that. One element of it is that sexual and gender violence are at the core of prison operations, right? And they always have been. That jails and prisons have always included and constantly include sexual harassment, sexual assault of people within them as part of how they work, right? That's central. And also because we know that sexual and gender outsiders are targets of policing and targets of violence while they're locked up in these different kinds of detention environments, right? We also can link this to feminist understandings of what happens to around women's health and around pregnancy, right, in jails and prisons. We were just talking about this before the panel. I'm sure a lot of you know and can imagine the intensity of the medical neglect of needs around pregnancy and childbirth in prisons and jails and around breastfeeding. And it is a severe and heart-wrenching story that's going on right now, even as we speak, right? And so there's a central concern that we've been thinking a lot about around how we know that our communities are targeted, and we also know that there's this increasing way that we're used as a name for the reason we need jails and prisons, right? So one form of this is the idea of hate crimes. We need to build more prosecuting power because we got to get those transphobes and homophobes, right? So that's one way that we get mobilized, even though we're targets of the system, to be reasons for the system. That's very disturbing right now, right? When we, of course, know that the biggest rapist, homophobe, transphobe is the criminal punishment system itself. Right? There are always these good reasons, right? These needs for building new jails and prisons, right? And in California, there's recently been this big idea that we should build gender-responsive prisons. So there was this whole idea about building prisons where women could live with their children in the prison, right? Really what it's about, what it's always about, was building hundreds of thousands of new prison beds. That's what it's about. That's not ever good for women, right? But that's the idea. There's this idea, right? I mean, we see this in this way, like feminist arguments co-opted by our government in all kinds of ways. The women of Afghanistan are suffering. That's why we're going to bomb the living shit out of them, right? Like, what is that? But so we need to look behind these good reasons, and I think this panel has done an excellent job of that. So I won't speak much longer. Obviously, you know, there are many subgroups within prisons and jails who face extreme forms of violence, harassment, and medical neglect. Obviously, people with disabilities, people with AIDS. There's so many groups, right? Obviously, transgender people are not the only one, but that it's helpful oftentimes to look through these vectors to understand some of the significance of the violence that's going on. And what we need to move towards is a discussion of what actually will make us safe. Because all of this stuff, the war on terror, the war on drugs, prison expansion, detention expansion, it's based on the notion that somehow it's going to make us safer. And it's based on this deep fear that's been sort of inspired in everyone about terrorism and crime and all this stuff. There's nothing safe about these facilities. They can't be safe. It's a failed idea. It's a failed notion. We already know what makes people safer. Education, services, healthcare, drug treatment, housing, income, community support. These are the things that make us safe, right? Not taking people out of our communities and warehousing them in deadly conditions, right? So there's a lot of alternative models out there. We've heard some of them tonight. I'm sure many of you know about the idea of restorative justice, right? There's a lot of other ways people are thinking about how to deal with the things that we now pretend we deal with, but actually utterly fail to deal with and exacerbate through the criminal punishment system. And that's the direction that Seattle should be going in. And the fundamental piece here for me is that there's nothing salvageable about the criminal punishment system as it is. It doesn't work well to do anything, right? And we are smart, we can think of new things, and we do live in a progressive city in a lot of ways, right? So this is an opportunity. If they're saying we won't keep your people anymore in our facility, this is the moment for Seattle to take a step to be totally different. Right? Like, what if we just didn't lock anybody up and that was how we were safer? So I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited about the ways in which we're being given clear tools on how we can be involved in fighting this through supporting the initiative. I'm excited also that you all know that there's so many organizations in this city that we can all be supporting that do this work. CARA is one of my favorite organizations. It's trying to think outside the box. Domestic violence and sexual assault without turning towards the racist criminal punishment system. Obviously, Real Change, Transforming Justice Seattle, and so many other groups are doing this work. So it's an honor to be part of this panel, and I thank you all for the time.